advocacy, education, an opportunity for all investors or housing providers, and an equitable distribution of rights for both the landlord and the tenant. So we welcome you here with open arms and open hearts. Rafael?
Mike, would you like to make a statement?
I'll make my opening statement. Welcome, everybody. This idea of having this forum has been a work in progress, and the NBOA is pleased to collaborate with the Latino Real Estate Investors Council. I have one little matter I'd like to plug before we get on to business. We have our big event, the Summer Soiree event, August 3rd in Rogers Park. Please keep an eye out for the invitations, and we hope to have 400 to 500 housing providers and sponsors at a festive celebration to talk about and celebrate all that's good that's going on. And so keep an eye out, and we hope to see you at this event. The Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance is focused on working with our 10 affiliates to promote responsible development and management of properties in the neighborhoods. And with that, I'd love to introduce our moderator for this session, Rafael Leon of CMHDC, a member of the Latino Real Estate Investors Council and the NBOA, a dear friend and appropriate to this conversation, a native Venezuelan. And I know very passionate about the cause we'll be talking about today. So Rafael, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sonia. Again, my name is Rafael Leon. I'm the Executive Director of the Chicago Metropolitan Housing Development Corporation, better known as CMHDC. We are a nonprofit corporation providing affordable housing throughout the metropolitan area. And also one of the founding members, along with Sonia Del Real and Fran Martinez of the Latino Real Estate Investors Council, also known as LREIC, which is one of the NBOA affiliates. Today, we have an incredible panel of experts that will give us an idea of what is being done to help immigrant families arriving in Chicago. And since we are mostly housing providers in this meeting, identify potential ways that we can help these families either with housing or employment opportunities. Please note that we will not be discussing federal policies related to immigration, and we will focus on the current situation that we are facing now and how we can help. The announcements were made about LREIC and the NBOA soiree on August 3rd. So if you haven't registered, please do so. If you want to be a sponsor, please contact Mike for sponsorship. And if you have any questions, please put them on the chat. I will be helped by Amerit and Sonia in asking questions at the end of the presentations. So with that in mind, let me get to the panel. We have Alderman Andre VAZQUEZ, who is the Alderman of the 40th Ward. Alderman VAZQUEZ just started his second term as Alderman and has been appointed as Chairman of the City Council Committee on Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Also with us is Amy Novorita, who is the Chief Program Officer for Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago and has been immersed in the Catholic Charities Immigration Program. She has worked closely with the city and the state in not just identifying housing opportunities, but also providing social services to the immigrants who are faced with incredible burdens, as the majority are not familiar with the American way of life and do not speak the language. We also have Paul ROLDAN, who is the CEO of the Hispanic Housing Development Corporation. Paul is an institution in the affordable housing arena and has been with the corporation for 46 years. Hispanic housing has developed over 4,600 apartments and currently manage more than 8,000 units in Chicago. The fourth member of the panel is KALMAN Resnick. KALMAN is a partner with the legal firm of Hughes, Socol, Piers, Resnick, and Dean. KALMAN has more than 40 years experience as an immigration attorney, as well as labor and employment law, civil rights, and constitutional law. Thank you all for agreeing to participate in this panel. again, if you have any questions throughout the conversation, please put them in the chat and we get to those conversations, those questions later on. Let me start with Alderman VAZQUEZ. Alderman, what is the city doing to manage the influx of immigrants? And what is your role as chairman of the Committee on Immigrant and Refugees' Rights?
Sure. Thank you, Rafael, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here. As far as what the city is currently doing, it's working its best to try to live up to its name as a welcoming city. So many of you know we have an influx of thousands of refugees and asylum seekers that are currently staying in police stations across the city. So the city is looking to identify initially public buildings that are large enough to provide shelter so we can decompress the police stations, but also looking to see what funding we can get from the state and federal government in order to be able to do a number of things. Right now, the buildings that we're looking at are public buildings, but it makes sense to look at private opportunities as well as partner with the state to figure out how to do rent subsidies for folks that are here. So that as when we think about the population that's coming, right, these are folks who are seeking a better life. There are language issues, and currently they're trying to find shelter. So what we're doing is, as best as possible, providing not just shelter, but also the support services to help bridge someone who's come from another country to allow them to be able to sustain and then continue to add on to be what we know would be a positive net add to the city, right? It increases to our base and it adds to what makes Chicago a vibrant city. So right now we're working to make sure we can shepherd that transition as best as possible.
Do you know how many families have arrived or how many individuals?
Yeah, so since August of last year, we're about at 12,000 individuals. The breakdown as far as families, that I'm a little fuzzy on. And as far as the amount that are staying currently at the police stations, we're looking at somewhere close to 600 to 700 people. And that's not just individuals, it's families, those are children, those are babies, all that are here currently.
Thank you. Amy, how is Catholic Charities working with these families? I know that Catholic Charities has been deeply involved in providing services and finding housing opportunities for these individuals. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Rafael. And thank you so much to the Neighborhood Builders Association and the Latino Real Estate Investors Council for hosting today. We are just really grateful for the chance to connect and answer questions. So Catholic Charities has been working with the city and the state and others since mid-December and continuing to do that work today to help the folks that were living in the hotels in the suburbs temporarily and now are currently in the city shelters to help them connect to apartments. And so we have been working to leverage up to 6 months of emergency rental assistance that's been allocated by the state for new arrivals. And we have been able to connect to date about 1,200 households. So that includes individuals, that includes families, about 1,200 households to apartments over the last 7 months now. And those have been in and around Chicago and the suburbs. I'm happy to, I guess I'll share a little bit more. You know, we work in hand with the landlords and the tenants, potential tenants, to identify the units, to do walkthroughs, to, help the tenants move through the lease process. And then we coordinate with the Illinois Housing Development Authority, who then processes applications for that rental assistance.
So is the rental assistance coming from the state or is the city of Chicago also providing rental assistance?
The rental assistance funds are being administered by IDA. I actually am not 100% sure as to which, the origin, whether all of it's state, some of it's city, but that state agency is administering the dollars.
Okay, good. So what other, do you know any other agencies that are working in this program?
Yes, so I'm happy that, to be here today and to represent the work that's happening across the nonprofit sector. There are dozens of organizations that have been helping. We have been partnering with ICER, with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, which has been coordinating with dozens of what we call welcoming centers across the state, and typically smaller community-based organizations who help folks really kind of get integrated and connected into communities once they've landed an apartment. And then we've also been working really closely with New Life Centers, which is based in Little Village and has been helping the families and individuals move in. Like they've got a warehouse where they're either purchasing at cost or taking donations for furniture and helping insure. And then they've got trucks. So they're actually helping folks to move in and get set up with those initial kind of household items and furniture.
Amy, you mentioned that, are you working throughout the state of Illinois or primarily in the city of Chicago and its suburbs?
Primarily the city of Chicago and the suburbs. We have had some cities across the state that have reached out, that have units available and want to partner with us. We've placed folks, for example, in Peoria, in Joliet. And so what we have found is, you know, folks are wanting community. So it does help if there's multiple units or if they know they'll be in a community where folks are Spanish speaking or Spanish speaking groceries, et cetera, are readily available. But we've primarily been finding housing across Chicago and in the suburbs too.
Great. Paul, since you are so involved with the Hispanic Latino community, can you talk about your experience of what Hispanic housing may be doing to facilitate housing these individuals? You're muted, Paul.
You don't know how to read lips yet after all of these virtual meetings? Okay. So
it happens to all of us.
Let me just back up a second and I'll answer your question, Rafael. So Hispanic housing and all of the other community development corporations that are actually building housing ground up and have affordable housing portfolios have a dilemma. And the dilemma is, you know, that we Hispanic housing manage over 8,000 apartments, but we ain't got any housing for people when they call because all those apartments are occupied. And beyond that, we have waiting lists. So there is a fundamental dilemma with affordable housing portfolios in any city, especially large cities, and the amazing demand for high quality housing that's affordable, both for seniors and families. So there's our dilemma: is we got all these apartments, but they're, you know, people are living in them, and then we have waiting lists to boot. So what we've come to understand is that to the extent that migrants apply for political asylum, not necessarily have it approved, but not simply because they have to go through a process, but they do apply, and there are people helping folks apply. That gives them a federal status, a federal, dislocation status under the Uniform Relocation Laws, and that allows them to apply for federal subsidized housing and also in privately owned housing for the public like ours. It also, and that's what we're doing, is it allows them to go to the very top of the waiting list. So they get priority, they go to the very top, they don't go to the end of the waiting list. That's extremely important because at least the family developments, you know, we have quite a few units, there's some movement there, but we can't move people right in. So there is, you know, one of the dilemmas. I've taken the position, and you know, I'll get in a little bit with the Chicago Housing Authority, they should too, that people who are here in the city who are on waiting lists, whether it's with public housing or our own waiting list, they're living somewhere now. They have a home. They may not like it. They may be paying too much, whatever it is, they want to move. These newly arrived migrants, they ain't got a place. They're homeless. They got kids sleeping on police station floors. So they should be rightfully, morally given a priority to move into housing. So one of the dilemmas that I've sort of run into that bothers the hell out of me is that, by the way, stop me if this answer is too long. I want to.
Oh, I will.
So the
But you
Chicago Housing Authority, the Chicago House, you don't have a hook, so it's not, you can't. The Chicago Housing Authority, the third largest in the country behind New York, Puerto Rico, and Chicago, right, has housing choice vouchers. They get these housing choice vouchers, and more of them every year. I think they get 50 or 70 a year. I forget, 120 a year. I forget what it is. And I was in a meeting with the people who run that program and use housing choice vouchers for migrants coming in. We got people who need them here in the city already. Well, in a city that has declared itself, a city that welcome, folks coming from other countries, have a mechanism. We don't have a system. We don't have money, and we're not even using our own public housing resources to accomplish the mission of receiving migrants. So that's a problem.
Let me ask a question, because you raised a good point about immigrants being homeless. And we have seen in the papers some resistance from some communities about housing immigrants. Do you think that it may be better to classify immigrants as homeless?
Well, I think, how we classify them, unless it gives them some sort of preference status, to me, doesn't make that much difference. The reality is, they not only are sort of, burn their bridges behind them and don't have a lot of options in their lives. So,
yeah,
need
probably
to try to help.
The thing is that in Chicago, as well as in many cities around the nation, there is a lot of emphasis in trying to resolve the homeless population. So they may be combined. We may be able to combine resources if they are considered homeless at the same time that they're considered refugees. Alderman.
Yeah.
Yes, I say there's different ways to look at it. So for example, the amount of services one would need for unhoused compared to for refugees is different, right? There's language considerations to take into account for folks who might be suffering mental health issues or substance use disorder when we're talking about some of the unhoused populations. Some of those services are different. But as it pertains to looking at infrastructure and housing, right? Folks need a roof over their head and shelter. So in that regard, that need is very much the same. And I think the conversation that can be had is what it looks like to provide transitional housing for refugees that could pivot and become more permanent housing for the unhoused populations that we also have. But as it relates to more building owners and folks who have units, I think you could look at it similarly if it's about like housing vouchers, for example, or just housing in general.
Can the city use some of the trust fund money? I believe that is the trust rental assistance program that they have under the trust to provide rental assistance for some of these individuals?
It can be, for some, we'd have to look at CHA as far as the agency, but I know the state has funding that it's appropriated specifically for that, which could be used for both populations, refugee as well as for unhoused, that would provide rental assistance for up to 6 months for folks who need it, which we think would be adequate to really give someone a chance to kind of settle in, find a job, be able to get the kind of revenue to continue after that.
Okay, thank you. I want to give some time to KALMAN Resnick, who is an attorney specializing in immigration, to give us an idea of what kind of legal status these individuals may have. Every case is completely different, but I think it will be good to get a sense of whether these individuals who are arriving here from Texas and I guess Arizona, whether they have the ability to work, what rights do they have? Can we employ them as housing providers? Can we work with them? Because one of the concerns that this group has is if I want to employ somebody, what Are they legally here? Are they legal? Are they able to work? KALMAN, can you address the status of these individuals? You're muted, KALMAN. You see, Paul, you're not the only one. We're all go through the same thing.
There we go.
There.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
My name's KALMAN Resnick. It's good to be with you all. I practice primarily immigration law and have done so for a number of years. And I'm also in my firm and is advising a number of the individuals coming from the border area. And we're also working with a lot of nonprofits and advising them as well. And I was on our new mayor's committee to advise him on these what the immigration issues are for the city in the transition process. So you're right. I can't give an answer that applies to all people, but I can give you answers that apply to many of these individuals, most of them. So people entering at the border who are turning themselves in at the border to the authorities from the Department of Homeland Security are either being paroled into the country, that is, they're given a paper that says you are paroled into the country and being put in removal proceedings, or they're being put in removal proceedings but not as a parolee. In any case, if they want to apply for asylum, they have to apply within the first year of their coming to the United States. And there's very important that any individual coming into the US at the southern border know that they have to apply within 1 year from their date of entry. The government is backlogged in the process of scheduling removal hearings. That's the name that the law uses now for what used to be called deportation hearings. So you can't wait till you get your hearing before an immigration judge to decide whether to apply for asylum. If the individual wants to apply for asylum, they have to do so within 1 year of their coming to the United States. If they apply for asylum, they have 5 months after they apply for asylum, they can then apply for work authorization. And starting with 6 months after they apply for asylum, the USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, can issue an employment authorization card, which in most cases should be good for 2 years. So the vast majority of these individuals coming to Chicago from the southern border need to get help in applying for asylum if they are fearful of returning to their home country, either because of past persecution that they suffered or a fear of future persecution. Now, not everyone who is coming in across the southern border is going to qualify for asylum because the asylum law has clear standards as to who's eligible for asylum. Simply because you're coming from a country where there's political turmoil does not give you a right for asylum or economic turmoil. And usually what a person has to show is that a reasonable person in your situation would fear returning to your home country for reasons that are covered by our asylum laws. And
is your experience that most people who enter the country that are coming from the border, they don't wait a year or 5 months to apply for asylum if that's their intention. They usually will do it as soon as they're able to, which will trigger also their ability to apply for a work permit. What is your experience in that?
well, my experience is most of these people can't go through the asylum process of application without getting a lawyer, and most of them are getting help from a nonprofit where people are trained in how to advise people how to apply for asylum. And as a result, most people that we're seeing are not applying for asylum because they really don't understand what they need to do and what the process is. This is something that we have been in discussions with the governor and others about how to provide funding so people can get legal advice from people who are trained and in representing individuals seeking asylum in the United States. It's an enormous problem because there's most of these people have no way of applying for asylum in the United States without getting legal help in filling out an application. That is really hard in short supply. Most of the nonprofits providing free or reduced cost legal services are backed up with all the individuals seeking representation. It's not just people crossing at the southern border, it's large numbers of people coming in other ways to our country, and with also the large undocumented population we have. And people, these organizations don't have sufficient funds to provide the necessary services.
Yeah. A question for the Alderman and then Amy. Alderman, is part of your role to facilitate putting these individuals in contact with organizations that can facilitate the application, or at least give some orientation of what they need to do in order to apply for the asylum? Are there funds allocated for that? Is the city has a contract maybe with some organizations that can facilitate that?
So I know that there was, if I believe, around $5 million in the last budget that were appropriated for like immigration legal funds. What in reality, how it's been playing out is really identifying how the city doesn't have that kind of fleshed out program. And so having that level of influx has allowed us, or created the opportunity for us to partner with the mutual aid groups, to volunteer groups on the ground, places like Centro Romero that have relationships with legal teams to offer those services. So by virtue of it being a crisis, it's led to making more of those connections and creating the kind of network that better facilitates that level of support.
The city hires a lot of attorneys too, and maybe they can provide very large legal firms. They may be able to provide pro bono work. Have you explored that?
Yeah, and then there are different lawyers as well as teams that do offer the pro bono work. So what we're working to do, and some of this checking in with the different departments, is how to provide that information so it's easily accessible, right? Because you could imagine that whether you're a refugee or not, I mean, your average neighbor has a hard time identifying their ward office, coming to find services. So try to make sure that not only do we have those systems set up, but that we are communicating it out. Something else that we're working on, specifically our office, is to increase and improve the way the city deals with language access, because currently it's not the best. And so looking at how we can best provide translation services, how we can translate not only documents, but actually people at our offices, is something that we're also looking to bring up during this year's budget process to make sure we're continuing to improve that dynamic as well.
Good. I could tell you, I mean, I'm Venezuelan myself, and I came to the United States 42 years ago. So I didn't have to go through this process. I came to go to school and then was able to stay here legally. But I could tell you that traditionally in Venezuela, there is no a sense of working with community organizations. There is not a sense of working with the elected officials to get any help. Venezuelans don't like to depend on government for anything. They don't like, they like to be self-supporting, self-independent. So there is not that tradition of using the resources that we have here through community organizations and through elected officials.
Yeah,
So,
I would agree. So I'm first generation. My parents are from Guatemala, and so when they came over, it was not on a student visa. So they came as many families do, and I recall having to help them learn English and having the citizenship courses on VHS back then. But similarly, I don't think it's exclusive to Venezuela or the Latino populations. I think a lot of different countries have this thought of trying to do as much as they can by themselves, and it being shameful to ask for help. And then you add that the really kind of awkwardness one feels trying to walk into a government office where people speak a language you don't know.
Right.
There's just a lot of hurdles that we need to overcome to make sure that those services are easily available and that people feel comfortable and confident to be able to access them.
Yeah.
I think it's super important to understand that many of the people crossing at the southern border are not going to get asylum in the United States if under the laws as they are currently written. And many of the people, to get asylum, you have to show facts that demonstrate that you have a reason to fear persecution in your home country based on something about you that you can't change, something you did, or something about you in terms of your ethnicity or religion or your, and so many of the people coming here are leaving Venezuela or other countries because the economic situation is disastrous. The government has given temporary protected status to Venezuelans who entered before a certain date, but these new entrants are not covered by that.
Right.
And so there are options that should be looked at. I know that one is to redesignate Venezuela as for temporary protected status so that new entrants who have entered since the last designation date can apply for and obtain temporary protected status and work authorization. Another problem is that many of the people coming to the United States left their home country, let's say Venezuela, went to live in Colombia or Chile or Peru, had legal status there, and had work authorization, and then for various reasons decided to come to the southern border and enter the United States. And one of the worst things that's going on right now is that many people are being marketed to by the corrupt organizations that are involved in drug trafficking, are now trafficking human beings. And they're telling people, just come to the southern border, pay us $10,000, we'll get you to the southern border and you'll get work authorization and a green card. And so, these people are being exploited by the cartels. Yeah. Same people who are making life very difficult in their home countries are now marketing them, pay me $10,000 and I'll get you into the United States with work authorization and a green card. So this is really, a tragic situation. And, but unless there's some change by which people can get temporary protected status because of the disastrous conditions in Haiti or Venezuela or some of the other countries.
That's right. Let me ask a question because I just want to be clear. Somebody comes here and then applies for asylum. That asylum hearing may take 2 years. What happened? Or longer?
No. There are cases, the backlog now in many cases could be 5 years, could be 7 years. We have clients who have applied for asylum 5 years ago.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
But that's not true in every case because there are many new immigration judges and their dockets are not as backlogged as some of the others. But this is, ultimately what we have here is a breakdown in the governmental functions that relate to the asylum process. For many people, simply applying for asylum and then applying for work authorization gives them what they came to the United States for because of the backlog in adjudications. But ultimately, unless there's some change in our laws, asylum is not going to be granted to most of these people.
And that's what I wanted to hear, that once they apply for the asylum, then they have the opportunity to apply for the work permit, because for purposes of this discussion, I think that the housing providers are concerned about what happens when the rental subsidy goes away. I think that it's important to realize that they will have an opportunity to work. Am I correct on that?
To clarify, Ralph, so what I'm hearing you ask is if they apply for the asylum, then they qualify for the rental subsidies. Those are two different things.
No. What I'm saying is they apply for the asylum, and by applying to the asylum, they have the opportunity to apply for a work permit.
Right.
And that's what it becomes critical for this group to ensure that this will be employed at some point and they will be able to pay their rent.
If they apply for asylum and their case is not adjudicated within 5 months, they have a right to apply for work authorization.
Okay,
Application can be granted after for 6 months from the date they applied for asylum.
yep,
There are some backlogs in the process of getting the work authorization issued to people. And because the employment authorization is issued without regards to the merits of the asylum claim. So you could end up with work authorization and be here for a number of years waiting for your case to be adjudicated. As a practical matter, if we had there may be a need for some legislation that would resolve the backlogs in asylum applications and the large numbers of people in this country for many years with temporary protected status, for example, Salvadorans or Hondurans, who've been here 20 years with temporary protected status. In terms of how landlords may look at this situation, we have 12 to 15 million undocumented people in our country, and many of them are renters and they're paying their rent. So people, it's important to know that you're probably renting to lots of undocumented people already, and they're working in the United States without documents and paying rent, buying cars, in many cases buying house, and some of them are becoming landlords. And the important thing is people are very creative in establishing their lives here. The new people arriving are in somewhat of a different situation because of the desperation by which they've come to the southern border and entered our country, and they're in the legal process as soon as they enter the country because they've turned themselves in to the authorities on this border and been placed in removal proceedings.
yeah, let me give the Alderman, I think that you want to make a statement, and then Amy, if you can address some of those issues related to the housing providers, how we can work and what you need. So Alderman.
Yeah, I'm just really appreciative of KALMAN sharing with everyone, because although it might appear to some that this is a new problem, it is not. It is one that's been going on for decades and generations with people coming from the country, and a system that is not the most effective in bringing people on board to citizenship. Some might say it could be intentional, but that's up for people to view as in their perspectives. But the reality is that it is challenging for some people to do things in a legal fashion to come on board. And also, there is a way that people find to be able to sustain, get jobs, get paid, pay bills, and such. That has occurred now for over 50 years. It will continue to happen. People will find jobs. They're being employed now, even as they're coming. The challenge is that it is a larger influx, and getting the transition from when they first land here to get to the point where they have a level of sustenance. And so having the 6 months of rent subsidy really provides time for folks to be able to help solve a lot of those problems. To kind of boil it down, they're eager to work. They're going to find places to work. They're going to rent. They're going to pay bills, and they're going to become taxpayers like everyone else. It's just figuring out this transition from point A to point B as they're moving forward to do so.
There in the chat, someone's talking about temporary protected status being extended for another period of time, 18-month period, but that only applies to people who qualify based on their original date of entry. So yes, there's been an extension for Salvadorans, Hondurans, Nepalese, and Nicaraguans in temporary protected status, but that doesn't mean new entrants from those countries can apply for temporary protected status.
Right.
It only applies to people who already applied based on their original date of entry. And the same is true now for Venezuelans. Now, when the government extends employment authorization and temporary protected status, the government could also redesignate that country so new entrants from those countries can be issued. And the government has done that, for example, for Syrians or Yemenis. but it has not chosen to do that for new entrants from
Latin America.
Venezuela,
Yeah.
for example, or from Guatemala or Honduras. So, our government, just like it is treating Ukrainians who enter the country in many differently than people who enter from Latin America. This is another example of where the government is treating people who might be eligible for temporary protected status based on where they're coming from.
Yeah. Amy, can you
Can we
talk a little
address the
bit about?
questions in the chat, Ralph?
Yeah.
There's a few questions there that are pertinent. to
Hold on a minute. I want to give Amy an opportunity to address the issue about the landlords or housing providers.
Yeah, thanks, Rafael and Sonia. So I think it's helpful at this stage, we have, as I said, connected about 1,200 households from new arrivals, 2 units, and about 1,000 have moved in, and folks have been in their units some folks have been in their units since January. So one of the questions that came up as we were preparing for today is how many have experienced issues, evictions, kind of what is the day-to-day looking like? And so we connected with our team. So folks have this context. About 5%, about 50 of those units have had some issues that have ranged from, we've had some pest control issues that were in the units that were more on kind of, in those cases, more on the landlord side. The issues have also included a few instances of domestic violence. Noise has been an issue that's come up, and some folks not staying on the lease, that weren't on the lease, staying in the units. So there
Okay.
have been some issues. Those are the issues that have arisen. And again, it is about 5% of the leases. So I think it is helpful to think about how that compares. I'm not a landlord or a housing provider, but how that compares overall to the experience that folks have. We have not to date had any, we are not to date aware of any folks that are going through eviction. I think it's really important to note and not to overstate that these are folks that want to stay in the United States and do not want to get involved negatively with the legal system, which the eviction system would put them right into that process. I think the other thing that's really important to say is what we're starting to see, particularly folks that have been in the shelters for months. Some folks have been in the shelters since September and October. They have been able to save income over the last several months. And we are starting to see folks who are saying, we don't want to wait for the rental assistance. Can you just help us find a landlord? So I think that just is anecdotal, but that speaks to some of the concerns about folks being able to generate income. And the last thing I just want to add, Rafa, like that, I don't know if I can call you Rafa. I have a friend named Rafa.
That's fine.
Rafa.
Rafa,
Okay.
Rafael, all of us work.
So Rafa, so the other thing that I just think is important here is these are individual human beings and families, and the landlords, when we do the initial walkthroughs and those conversations and help to answer landlord questions, tenant questions, our staff, our case managers aren't coming with like, a throng of 12,000 new arrivals. They're coming in with one family. And so there is or one individual, maybe a couple individuals. So that's an important opportunity, as with any, tenant that you're considering, to ask the questions that you need to ask of that individual or that family and kind of making the assessment. So I just think it's always important to move beyond kind of the nameless, faceless mass of individuals to the folks that you would be considering along with any others as potential tenants.
That's a very good point. And let me say that my organization, CMHDC, we have housed 10 families. And out of those 10 families, one family said, we don't need the rental assistant. We just need an apartment that we can rent, because they have been working. Whether they work legally or illegally, I don't know, but they're able to pay the rent. And we take them, we do our due diligence, our property managers interview them and meet with them. And they have been fine so far. I know, let me call on Jeff Weinberg here, because I know that Jeff is on the call, but also he has some experience with renting apartments to immigrants. And I'd like to hear from you what your experience has been. Jeff?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So first off, I know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeff Weinberg. I'm the president and founder of Drexel Properties. We've been in business for more than 20 years. We mostly own and manage about 750 apartments all over the northwest side of the city. The immigrant community, I'd start out by saying, if you look at a reflection of any tenant base, the immigrant community looks the same. You wouldn't know other than the fact that you've screened them and whatever else. And over the years, we've always been committed to the communities in various different ways. We've worked with World Relief, the Ethiopian Community Association, Chicago Refugee Coalition, JYCS. We probably currently house a dozen immigrants, most of those recent. Some of them have been around for a while. I'll share a couple of stories that just show the success of it. I actually looked this up before the meeting. In February of 2017, a woman and her daughter showed up looking for an apartment. They didn't even speak any English. The daughter was probably about 15 years old, spoke a little bit of English. But we put them through a process. It wasn't our standard process because there were no credit scores or information. But we were able to tell through the discussions that that they had a certain level of education, that they had a work ethic, that they had a reasonable financial IQ, just the subjective things that sense that this would be a safe bet and we're doing something good. We housed that woman in an apartment in 2017. She's still a tenant with us today. She's in a larger, nicer apartment now with her daughter. Never missed rent. Her husband came shortly behind her. Cousins came, brothers and sisters came, and we've housed probably 12, 15 different Venezuelans that all came through this one thread of resource. And after the first experience, we just knew that the referrals were going to be good. I'm using the number 12. I didn't go back and look at the number. We had two issues. One of them was a younger woman. She skipped out and stiffed us on a couple months of rent, and we've been trying to find her. But not an awful situation, not something that you want. But we certainly didn't have to evict anybody. We had another situation where the tenant ended up with a roommate. The person moved out because they got married. The tenant left behind became a problem, which was a different story. Overwhelmingly, a very good situation. I just want to share one other story, and I'll be a little bit more brief. But we brought in a couple of Afghan families after the U.S. left Afghanistan. And this was with JCYS. They took two apartments in a building in West Rogers Park near Western and Devon. The agency came in and they set up and furnished the apartment, but they went beyond just putting in beds and a couch and maybe a couple of nightstands. They actually put in knickknacks. They put in Chicago Cubs and sporting paraphernalia that we first looked at it thinking like, this is like culture shock. This is not going to, our reaction was a bit like, this is not going to work. Those two families, and we've got a lot of immigrant families in this one particular building. They're among the better tenants. They were set up and kind of shown a little bit how things work, how things are done. And they've been, again, representative tenants, really indistinguishable from our tenant base. You've got some bad eggs across anything. But our experience has been overwhelmingly good. I might defer to Anthony, who's on this call, if he wants to chime in, because he's worked directly most recently with a couple tenants we put in through an agency. But again, it's all been positive. And all of them have found work and they work and they pay their rent, they take care of their place, they call us up with maintenance needs and we take care of them and we see that they're taking care of themselves. So again, it's been a good experience.
Yeah, there are some questions through the chat, and Sonia's going to help me with this, right?
Yeah,
So-
let's go through the questions. We got a couple minutes. We're supposed to go through 5, but we got to also address the questions and then send the link for you guys to connect if you have more questions, want to volunteer or have units or employment that you want to discuss.
Actually, 5:15.
Yeah, 5:15. Okay, we'll wrap it up by then. I'm going to scroll up to the top. Someone asked about, someone was referring to the question that we had talked in the prep discussion. What happens with Cook County that is known for disproportionately favoring, there's the tenants' rights, and we usually bite the bullet. We talked about that. And I think the answer to that question was addressed already very eloquently by Amy. Like, the delinquency rate is, you saw the numbers. That's not usually the case with this population. It is a legitimate concern, however, but I think the numbers will speak for themselves. And based on the testimonies that Jeff shared, I think we all feel, maybe, I know I do feel a little bit just, that much better about exploring, renting out my unit. Michael, you asked a wonderful question about issuing a W-2 or 1099 if someone is employing this population. I think that's more of an accounting question. I think from my experience at 1099.
Well, I think that it would be also a legal question, because if they don't have, they may have if they have a
Tax ID number.
Tax ID number, probably you can work with a 1099 or a W-2 form. But if they don't have either the Social Security or the tax ID number, there is no way that you can report that as payment. You can report it, but they're not registered with the federal government. Let me, before we proceed, I know that I have a call here to Marco Rodriguez, who is on the telephone, and he had a question. He has a question. Marco? Is Marco still on?
Let's move forward. I don't think he's
Okay.
on. Yeah.
I put it in the chat for Marco because he says he's can't unmute himself for some reason. So if you look at the chat, I put the two questions.
Here, let's go through the chat. What are the
Okay.
best suggestions you have for families who have arrived and have jobs, but don't have credit ratings, etc.? How can they find landlords willing to rent to them? That's an excellent question. I will share the link for you to provide your information. If you're a housing provider on this call and you're interested in how to rent, fill out that form. I'll put it in the chat box. Americ, can you do a screen sharing and share the QR code as well?
And let me answer that question partially because of from my experience. When we started working with the Department of Human Services and the Department of Housing, I say that I would waive the credit requirements, and that the screening will be more of the screening of the individuals, meeting with them, and having a conversation with them. It falls on the housing providers to go through your due process, but understand that they're not going to have a credit report, they're not going to have a criminal record because they have been here only for a few months, and they don't have the Social Security or the tax ID number. So you have to do your due diligence. What I did request was that these individuals work with social service agencies like the Catholic Charities or the Jewish Federation or Central Romero, because I knew that if we have if they have any problems, we can work with the social service agencies to address those concerns.
All right, next question from Diane. Have you come across any mental health issues with tenants? If so, how was that handled?
That would probably go to Amy.
Yeah, Diane, thank you so much for that question. What we have found with the vast majority of folks is they are in its hierarchy of needs. And so they're really focused on safety, housing, getting their kids enrolled in schools. We do anticipate that that mental health and particularly anxiety, depression will be a challenge that folks face because many have experienced trauma in their journeys and in the reasons that they have had to leave their countries due to violence or fear. And so, there are like Catholic Charities and so those local organizations, there are definitely organizations that offer mental health services. As I'm sure the Alderman knows and many of us knows, we don't have enough of those resources in and around the city. And so that is definitely an area that is, is an area of concern moving forward. But I think the issues that we would anticipate would be ones around sort of anxiety and depression.
This is more of a legal question. Is there a way we can, Marco Rodriguez asks, is there a way we can file for an expediter H-1B1 visa so we can have new immigrants to work with our constituents?
Well, first of all, H-1Bs are subject to a numerical cap because Congress has not agreed on an increase back to where the H-1B levels were before that provision sunset in the law. So right now there's a limited number of H-1Bs. Unless the employment is with the university, there's no exception to the limitation on new H-1Bs. If someone already is in H-1B status, then they can transfer H-1B employers. But there's a lottery held in April of every year for new H-1Bs that are not employed, where people are not going to be employed by universities. And that lottery allows for about 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 of the petitions to get adjudicated. The rest are not adjudicated because there's no H-1B numbers. Most of the people coming to the southern border wouldn't qualify for H-1B status. You have to have a university degree, and the job has to require that degree, a specific degree in a field of study that is needed, and the job has to pay the prevailing wage.
Let me ask a question also, because if the interest is from somebody to apply for an H-1B visa, I know that the federal government stopped the Venezuelans from entering illegally. As a way of stopping that, they also provided the opportunity for sponsors to sponsor Venezuelans. They have to apply in Venezuela. So if you have family members who are Venezuelans or individuals that you want to sponsor, then you can submit an application directly to immigration, and it's subject to review. And then they may provide parole for 2 years or something like that. That's not
Also,
but you should know that that applies. You don't have to be in Venezuela. You could be in a third country.
Yeah.
And this process of humanitarian parole coming into the United States through the East applies to Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Ukrainians.
okay, we're gonna move this question. We're gonna move forward with the questions. Laura Rodriguez asks, is the rent also more affordable? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Please clarify in the chat and we'll get back to it. What time? Is there an ethical day labor program for hiring migrant workers in Chicago? Alderman, maybe you can speak to that.
Ethical, I mean, it's a subjective question, I'd say, right? Currently, legally, there aren't programs, but because Chicago is a welcoming and sanctuary city, for those who want to hire and make sure they're providing services to the folks that are working for them, right? I can't explicitly say go forward and do such, but the city of Chicago is not going to be looking to prosecute folks who are hiring. That being said, there are real concerns that if you don't have legal hiring, that people are going to look to exploit some of the refugees. And so we'll be doing our best to stay in touch with all members of the community to find out where we see problems and address them.
Thank you. Gwinnett Burns, can migrants find jobs without socials or IDs?
It is, I think that is difficult, but, many immigrants, as the Alderman said, are here illegally, and they are able, as also Amy said, that they're able to find jobs and pay the rents. So the housing provider has to do their due diligence and feeling comfortable that somebody is working illegally, maybe, but they're able to pay the rent.
Okay, next question. How do you affect US laws of evictions on non-citizens that don't understand the US legal system and they don't speak English?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say that challenge is very similar to people who do understand English and still don't understand the laws.
I
or
heard
folks
that.
that have different language barriers. So I think you'd address it as such. You find someone who can translate, you explain what the laws are and what the expectations are, and kind of move forward from there.
Thank you. Next question, Yorley. What protections are there for landlords? We talked about that. How are the landlords able to identify individuals that need housing? Again, if you're a landlord, fill out that chat form or that contact form, and I will definitely connect you with Amy. I have a direct point of contact through Catholic Charities, and they have asked me to connect as a result of this webinar. How are individuals able to sign a lease when they are not citizens? I'll tell you what, non-citizens are signing mortgages and and buying homes. So if they're able to buy homes, I don't see why they shouldn't be able to sign a lease.
I think it requires a pen.
Yeah, I think it requires a pen, correct. Which organizations are working with the African diaspora? I think we addressed that. Someone addressed that.
Yeah, there's different groups for different populations. In the 40th, we have like an Ethiopian center, right? So that it's good to raise that question up, because the same thing we're talking about here for one population improves it for all populations coming from every country, right, in the globe, as they're coming to seek work, to find shelter here in the US and in Chicago.
Got it. Thank you. We addressed your other question, Michael, about the contracting and how do we connect if we have employment that we want to offer. If they did not come through legally, don't they have to go back? That was addressed. Any partnership with the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois for pro bono work? Maybe the Alderman, you can address that, or Catholic Charities.
I don't know explicitly, but it's something we can follow up on.
Okay. That would qualify someone for asylum. Okay, we talked a lot about asylum already. I think that's all the questions. Yep, those are all the questions. 8 new messages.
There is one here from Karen Fisher asking, what is the best suggestion for people who arrive here and have jobs, but they don't have a credit ratings? I think that's what is important to work with an organization like Central Romero or Catholic Charities, because they know the process and they can work with the housing providers to facilitate that process. It's just connecting the dots between the housing providers, the agencies that are serving these immigrants, the city or the state, and the immigrants themselves. They do have jobs, but they don't know. Remember what I said at the beginning, it's a completely different culture, a different way of life between Venezuelans or any people who come from Latin America and what we have here in the United States. So if I have to answer that question, I'll say contact Catholic Charities, contact Central Romero or Heartland Alliance, those organizations that are working with immigrants, and then you will be able to communicate what the needs are.
Yeah, and in an effort to bombard, to not bombard the audience with all these links and all these resources and having to copy paste screenshot, the best thing that you can do if you're interested in either volunteering or renting out or employing someone or in the community, make sure you connect using this contact form. I will be handling the responses there. I will be adequately connecting you to the right folks. So please take the time to do that. I've also entered it into the chat. I'll enter it again, so you can just link up from there. We are at 5:12. Any closing remarks from our panelists?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I just wanted to say, because I actually have to go to the next meeting, but I want to thank you all for hosting it. I want to thank all the participants and really for all the great questions. Anyone that needs to reach out can feel free to at 40thward.org. Or, Sonia, if you can connect me to anyone, I'm happy to help. And I'm really glad that we have a group here that's asking the questions as we're trying to identify housing for folks who we know, one, need it, and two, want to be here, get to work, and be part of what we are here as the fabric of our society. So thank you all so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Alderman.
Amy, final thoughts, Amy?
Just thank you so much for today's conversation. I told you this, Rafael. I really believe that landlords and housing providers are the unsung heroes of this crisis. and they're really helping to ensure people who are new to our city can make Chicago home. And so please reach out to us through the forum that Sonia linked into the chat, whether it's to say, yep, these are the units we've got, these are the addresses, or if you'd like to have a longer conversation with our team, we welcome the chance.
Thank you. Paul, final thoughts?
Just one, and that is a couple of restaurateurs who are paying dishwashers $18 an hour. I also know that many of these people who come with construction skills. I mean, they know how to do drywall, they know how.
Maybe, oh, we're losing him.
We're short-staffed in terms.
Unfortunately,
So
Paul, you're
we're
breaking up.
Paul, your speaker is not that great, or your connection is not that great.
But we
thank you.
we got a sense of what you're
you were
saying, that
going.
Mm-hmm.
they come with great skills. KALMAN, final thoughts? Is KALMAN still here?
I don't know. I don't see him.
Maybe he was disconnected.
That's okay. I would just like to say before everyone leaves, you should be receiving an email if you registered for this webinar. You'll receive the link to the recording and the link to the contact form. And again, on behalf of the Latino Real Estate Investors Council, Rafael, my board peers, Amerit, you did a great job. She's our newest board member. Shout out to Amerit. Thank you so much for participating and doing what you did. We'll go ahead and stay in touch. We are looking to expand our board. So look for that informational piece in the email that we will send following this webinar.
And I know that Mike wants to say something.
Yes, Michael.
All right, what a great collaboration between our groups. I'm so proud of our association with LREIC. And I'm very happy and grateful. The recording of this meeting will be on the NBOA website, hopefully within half a day, by the end of the day. So if you want to encourage anybody to view this recording, it should be on the nboachicago.com website. And thank everybody for being here today.
Mike, you forgot about the summer soiree.
Oh, I said it once. If we'll do it one more time and end the meeting with it. Amrit, if you can refresh that, but if not, look on our website, nboachicago.com. There it is. It's a great event and a way to support this organization so we can continue to have meetings like this one and help educate folks on best practices to having successful businesses and providing quality housing to the residents in Chicago and Cook County.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
all.
to the panelists,
care,
and
bye-bye.
thank you everybody for participating. Thank you all.
Bye,
Great
everyone.
job, guys.
Bye-bye.